guest is Carl Felton. He's a U.S.Navy veteran of World War II, and he participated in the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, better known, of course, as D-Day. And Carl, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start at the very beginning of your story. When and where were you born?
I was born in Somerville, Massachusetts, on February the 6th, 1926.
What was your life like growing up as a kid?
Sports. All the sports. Everyday sports. Should have been more academic in school, but sports. But a happy life. But it was during the Depression, if you get more specific. I was born in 1926. The Depression set in at 1929, and as a result of that, there was a lot of panic. People who were fortunate enough at that time to have stocks were losing them. People who had money in the bank were running to the bank to get their money out before the banks closed. There were people who lost their jobs. A lot of people were unemployed. They were unable to pay their rent, enough money to buy groceries for their families, and programs were set up to help them with food, and there was a sad situation at that time. Wages then, of course, were very, very low to begin with. If a person had a good job, they might make $35 or $40 a week.
Wow.
That would be the tops at that time.
So you were 15, almost 16 years old, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. What do you remember about your reaction to that?
Unbelief, really. We'd heard about the war over in Europe, but that was a surprise, to the nation. December 7, and they didn't foresee that, and were not properly prepared as a result. They didn't expect it. Pearl Harbor, yeah.
So you graduated high school in 1943, and you also joined the service that year.
Yeah, I graduated in 1943 in June. My family then moved to Maine, Augusta, Maine, from Massachusetts. My father got a job up there. And from there, I joined the Navy in Portland, about 60 miles south of Augusta, and took a train down there, and late fall, maybe October or November of 43. I was 17 at that time. I turned 18 the following February 44.
Talk about your training a little more. What did they train you to do?
Well, we had boot training up in Sampson, New York, and that lasted probably 2 months or so. And they had a variety of different things that they were teaching, rowing a boat and things like that, which most of us didn't know anything about. If we didn't know how to swim, we were placed into a big, huge swimming pool. I didn't know how to swim at all. And they had different pools. I was in one for about a half hour, and they said, that's good enough, good enough. Get into the next one. I got into the next one for a little while. This is one after another. I said, no, you're better than that. Get the next one. Well, the next one was, way over your head, and I said, that's good enough. I didn't learn how to swim. I didn't know how to swim. But in any event, the next step was to climb up very high on a ladder where there was a platform on top and a swimming pool on the bottom, and it was probably the height of 2 houses, So I climbed up there. You were supposed to jump down, May West, and I was frightened of that water, jumping. So I saw one person standing off to the side, and he apparently refused to jump. He just could not do it. And I saw that happened. So I walked over to him. I said, I'm going to go to where he is. I'm not going to jump either. He got away with it. Maybe I can get away with it too. So I walked over there, and then right away, the person in charge up there yelled at me so loud, he scared the heck out of me. So next thing you know, I left. I just jumped. But I thought I'd never return back up to the surface. But it was a great training course. It was strict, you know. Get up early in the morning and run 2 miles, and a variety of other things like shooting a rifle at a target and things like that. I can't remember them all, but I will say this. They had different companies, maybe 100 people in each one, and in charge was a chief petty officer who was very nice, very understanding. They were all young and were trying to learn, and he was trying to teach us stuff.
The big jump that you talked about that they had you do that was the height of 2 stories, was that so if you had to jump ship, you had experience doing it?
Well, that's why they were doing it, in case you had to jump off of a ship.
Well, you also learned communications. That was your position later on D-Day. So how did you learn communications aboard the Ceres or any other ship?
Well, upon leaving Sampson, New York, we got on a train, went down to Pier 92, New York City. We're there for a little bit in Brooklyn in a hotel, I guess. And then they put us on a truck, all traveled by truck, squeezed in to the Queen Mary. And the Queen Mary took off from New York City, and nobody knew where we were going. Always in the dark, you don't know. But we did know that it was traveling south. So people used to be saying, where are we going? Where are we going? Other people would say, well, it's getting warm. We must be going near Florida or somewhere. But what it was, they were avoiding the area between England and New York where the U-boats were frequently sinking ships, crossing back and forth. That was the purpose for that we learned later. Then went up across Spain and up into Scotland. Upon arriving in Scotland, I'd say for a week or so, we were just there. And then one day, some officers summoned everybody together. We had maybe a couple hundred sailors and a big circle, and the officers were in the middle, and we didn't know what it was all about. But anyway, they eventually said, we need volunteers for demolition. Well, at that time, I maybe didn't study enough in school, but I did not know the word demolition. But anyway, nobody stepped out, not one person. So then the officers started shouting, quite loud, why did you come over here? Well, I guess we came over because they took us over. But anyway, why did you come here? Well, unbelievably, I was one of those that did step forward. And fortunately, I'm an older person, 30. I call him old then. But he was in training with me in New York. And he yanked me back and he said, do you know what that is? And I said, no. He said, that's for the mine sweepers. He said, before D-Day. He said, you do not want that. So I think obviously what they did then, they selected people out of just picked names, I guess. But that was that beginning. And next thing you know, in my lifetime over there, they put us everything by train. Went into England to another camp, and there they had different sections of training people for different things. And I was put into a communication area to learn the Morse code and to be a signalman, flags, and then the Morse code with the light. So I liked that, and I picked it up, pretty good. So then I became able to communicate, with the light. Now, the light,
right.
I might say, the light, if you want to know a little bit about the light, it's a Morse code, ABC, and all of that. But at the beginning of that, it's a blur, just a blur. For example, my name is Carl. To spell my name out would be C dot dash dot dot A dot dash R dot dash dot L dot dash dot dot. So after a while, even after 75 years, it's ingrained into you. So to communicate properly, you do it slow, make sure the spaces are there, and the same thing in receiving the light from somebody else, do the same way. But unfortunately, a lot of them went so darn fast, and you can't, like a person talking too fast. So you have to really space it out to do it properly.
We'll talk more about that. We'll also talk about what happened with you and your ship on D-Day when we come back on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by Carl Felton. He is a World War II veteran of the U.S. Navy and also served at the Allied invasion at Normandy, known as D-Day, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Sir, when were you assigned to the MS series?
Well, following the training to be a signalman, we once again got on a train and went to Plymouth, England, on the shore, and once again went into barracks. And during a period of 2 weeks or so, we were doing like working parties, gathering supplies for the ships. And we were in warehouses, some of which were ammunition, and carting that also, transporting it to various ships. And that went on for about 2 weeks. And then, after that, by random, all of us were placed on various ships. And I was placed on a British ship called HMS Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, and that was an old 1918 World War I ship, very old. And it was a communication ship. It was not designed at the time to fire, airplanes, because they didn't want to attract attention, apparently. We had a lot of high-ranking officers on that ship, and some German airplanes came by, overhead, and passed by where I was, and then they went inland and dropped some bombs, in there, and then came back out again. And I will never forget when the planes came by, the officers were up top looking at the sky, and a British sailor and myself were up there also. And when the planes came in from the channel, like from France over, he and I would run that way, toward the water and duck. Young. We didn't know that if they ever hit, everything would blow up anyway. But we did that. And then when they went in and they come in that way, we ran again. There was like a fence, maybe 4 feet high. We there. I will say this: the officers stood right up there. There were American officers and British officers together, and when the planes came, they stood right up erect, saw what happening, and stood there. And when they came over, went back, and started back coming again, I felt a little relieved at not being so afraid, because one officer said, "Doggone it, they keep coming back." He didn't want to come back either. He wanted to return to France and stay there. I felt a little more comfortable at being afraid, for the planes going back and forth.
Right. So, talk to me about June 6th, 1944. How did the day begin for you?
Well, I understand that altogether on the various beaches, we're at Omaha Beach. Utah Beach was another American beach off to the west. I understand that all along there probably were 6,000 ships. You learn that, later. That there probably were 6,000 ships initially on the first wave, going over there. And they're just progressing over ships every place. And in front of us, off to the right, there were mines, and a ship did hit one. It was a Susan B. Anthony was the name of it. And when that got hit with the mine, big explosion, and it kind of turned off to the right, and then stagnated, stopped but the other ships continued, on. So apparently in the great design of things, they had ships, designed for that purpose to assist people if they had to jump off the ship. But I understand it did sink. Later I learned that.
How did that affect you, to see the ship right next to you get sunk?
Well, it happened so quickly. I mean, it was shocking to see that, and concern for those people that would be on that ship.
As you got closer, what happened next?
Well, there was a storm at the time. And I understand later that Eisenhower wondered, what should we do here? Should we go or not go? There was a debate about it. You learn that later. But anyway, they decided to go because they were planned to go. And they did. And before long, you observed in the water for the ships, the LSTs, they went all of the way in, and then the troops and the tanks went down, and there was a lot of casualties, and a lot of the bodies never even reached the land, as I understand it. So because of that, there were a multitude of dead bodies everywhere, and they were floating everywhere. I recall looking and seeing one body having not only the Mae West, but an inner tube, all of which, portrays the feeling of the desire to live and not die.
Much more with U.S. Navy veteran, World War II veteran, and D-Day veteran Carl Felton here on Veterans Chronicles. We are back on Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today and in the home of Carl Felton, a World War II veteran of the U.S. Navy, served at D-Day. And, sir, we're right in the middle of that story. You mentioned that there were roughly 6,000 Allied ships off of the Normandy coast. Your job is to communicate with not all of them, but a lot of them. How difficult or not difficult was that, given all those ships being there?
Well, there were 6,000 ships, I understand, but they ran along the coast of France, all the way from Utah Beach, passing by Omaha Beach, and all the way Golden Beach, where the British were. It was a long, long distance. So you're only able to view the ships within the area where you were. And as I understand it, our ship was designed to be a communication ship directing convoys and traffic of the various ships in and out, and also communicating, I'm sure, with all these officers, what's going on in other places too. So that's what we were doing primarily. And being a signalman, we also had radio men also in the cabin. So between the two, as far as the lights are concerned, when we were directed to communicate, we did that. And when ships communicated with us, we did that. But we're told, what to say.
When did you find out that we had successfully captured the beach?
Never. That was ongoing. There was very, very little that I can recall of the German airplanes at that time, coming from France over. It was primarily the United States Air Force going over from England in that direction. There were, however, shells coming out from the beach, from the Germans. Later on, I had an opportunity to go on the land, not initially, but after I had returned to England and I went back again to France on an LST, then we went inland and viewed, what looked like in there, and we noted that they had, like on a railroad tracks, very, very wide railroad tracks with huge guns in there, and underneath they had pillboxes still with the shells, a lot of shells. I don't know how many of those there were, but we did happen to see some.
Wow. What was it like to step foot where that immense battle had happened?
Well, the thoughts were concern for those that had to continue on and what they faced in there. And like the Battle of the Bulge situation, which this young lady here, her husband was born in 1925. He was in the Army, and he was involved in the Battle of the Bulge. So it was bad. We heard about that subsequently, how many lives were lost there, a lot of lives. That was a difficult situation there. Yeah.
Where did you go after that?
The ship I was on returned to England. Things had settled down a lot on the beachhead. Then I returned from England on an LST to Cherbourg, which was not near Omaha Beach. It's off to the east somewhat on a part of the land which sticks out quite a bit. And I was assigned there to a tower as a signalman with shifts of 7 in the morning to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7, communicating with ships out there. And it was all darkness. And I recall one scary night there, I had the shift at 11 o'clock at night to 7. And from the barracks, it was probably a quarter of a mile to walk to where the tower was, because it was way, way out on a peninsula, and ships would come in the daytime and dry docks. You're familiar with dry docks. The ship would come in the water and unload. So in the mornings, there would be big piles, in the air for people to carry wherever they were going to carry them to. On this particular night, it was dark, and I was walking along to get to the end of it where the tower was and to climb up on that. And then on the side, there was all piles way, way as high as a house almost. And then there were areas where the ships had gone and there'd be nothing but water there. And I was walking along, and all of a sudden, I heard a voice behind me. And I turned, it was a German voice, and I turned my head, and I saw what to me was a huge guy, and he had a long coat, and he was behind me, and he had spoken when he was probably a car length, and back of me over toward the water pot, and I turned and saw him. Well, I was always a fast runner, but I think on that night I could have won the Olympics, because I took running, and I don't think my heels ever touched the ground. It was all on my toes, because I didn't have a gun or anything. We didn't carry a gun. And there I go, took away, and ran for my life, because obviously he was going to hit me over the head and toss me into the water. He came out from behind, he was hiding. And when I passed by, he came back out and was behind me, walking toward me. So it was pretty obvious what he was up to, but he made the mistake of speaking instead of walking silently and hit me over the head. So that was rather scary looking back upon it.
Did they ever apprehend him?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I do not know.
Now, Cherbourg was a very busy place. That was the main port where all the supplies were coming in. So
Yes.
describe what it was like there.
My part of it, as I say, was the communication part of it, but things would settle down, not like it was earlier.
So how long were you in Cherbourg, and where did you go after that?
When my departure from Cherbourg was back to England, and on England, I was again on a show stop, a station with a flashing light, with the ships going by on a inlet. And we had occasion then in England, it's all pretty much quiet, you could go out and things like that. I remember when Christmas came one time, and I went off and got on a bus, and it was kind of eerie because nobody else was on the bus, but I just wanted to get out of the camp. And I will say something about the people over there. I had occasion one day in Plymouth to be walking along, and I met this young girl. She was 17, and we talked, and then went to an outside little restaurant where they had famous for the English cod, fish, I think, and chips. And then I walked her back to where she lived, and then she told me that her mother was killed by the bombing. Her father was off somewhere, and she had an older sister, and she was in the military somewhere. So she was staying with some other people that were taking care of her. And the area, you have to say that the people over there, even though they're not involved in the military part of it, they were exposed to the war. And the churches were down, schools, houses, rubbish, everywhere. So they're part of it all as far as the suffering and the grief and not knowing, where her father was, not knowing where her sister was, but knowing her mother was gone.
Then what, sir? After you went back to England, then where did you go?
That was rather the termination of my ventures over to France, and I remained on that station. They called it Vicarage Barracks in Plymouth. And then word came that the war was over, and there was jubilation everywhere. And they had a parade, a huge parade, and the Americans, marched along the streets, and the people cheering and everything. And that was the termination of it. And a little bit prior to that, they did have me on a destroyer escort for a while, and was more or less patrolling. But I will say one thing, was patrolling, but we did have an occasion to venture out pretty good onto the ocean, and we ran into a storm, and the storm was such, you thought the destroyer escort was going to tip over. I mean, it would be going along, and then down, down, down. You'd think it was going to hit the bottom. Then it would hit a wave and go way, way, way back. Then it would turn over on its side. You thought it'd tip over that way. And everybody was down underneath. Nobody's out. Everybody's down holding on. But the ship didn't sink. But that was, I have to say, quite scary. It was a small ship, destroyer escort.
Right.
Out in the ocean.
Oh, that would be very harrowing.
It was.
Very. Were you still over in Europe when the Pacific War ended?
No, The Pacific War was still going on, and I had a brother who was 2 years older than me. He also joined the Navy when he was 17. He was mechanically inclined, so he was referred to aviation machine school in Pensacola, Florida, and he became very proficient in the airplane engines. He was assigned to an aircraft carrier called CVS Wake Island in the Pacific. My brother was gone from home pretty much most of 4 years out there in the Pacific. His ship was in the middle of a lot of activity, and eventually it was struck by a suicide Japanese bomber, kamikaze, which struck the bow. The ship didn't sink, and there was no deaths because where the kamikaze suicide bomber struck was at the bow, and that was the sleeping quarters, and at that time everybody was at battle station. But that was scary for him.
What was it like to come home?
Well, strange to say, when you're gone for your family for a couple years, and when you were left, you were very young, and when you come back, it's 2 years later almost, although you have matured somewhat, the fact that there's been that separation for so long, you seem to be detached and somewhat scared almost to come home. And it was very difficult for me to ring the doorbell because I felt that I didn't know what to say. I felt different, like a different person almost. I really, on the way home from the Fargo building in Boston to get to Medford, Massachusetts, where my family moved back to, was hard. It was hard to go in there. But after that, it became relaxed again. But just to get there, you didn't know what to say.
Once you hugged them, it was all good, right?
Yes, it was. It was. Almost immediately. But there is that strange thing if you don't see anybody for a long time.
So you left the service in 1946.
Yes, I did. I was discharged from the Navy, I think in April 46. Yeah.
What did you do in your career after that?
When I came back home, I went to Newman Prep in Boston, and there, the professors in there were such that they seemed so much on a higher level that it made you want to learn. In other words, it developed a thirst for learning. You wanted to know things, whereas before in high school, it wasn't that way. But I was very, very impressed by those professors. They used words and terminology you hadn't heard before. And one professor referred to the class as becoming members of the intelligentsia and letting us know that knowledge is power. I remember that expression a lot. It made you want to learn. Then I went to Suffolk University and Suffolk Law School after that. But one thing I carry away about, a war situation, it's sandwiched in between a period of peace between World War I and what we have today. We had World War I, where after that, folks referred to that is the war to end all wars. Woodrow Wilson said that. In 1920, he said that. And he promoted that the countries on the planet come together and form what he referred to as the League of Nations, whereby all countries would form a military so strong that no nation would fear, every nation would fear to declare war. He advocated that. It didn't go through, it never happened, and unfortunately, the United States at that time voted against it too. I think they were finished with war, they didn't want to have any more part of it apparently, but the United States did not vote for it either. You know, so here we are today, the war of World War II is over, and we still have skirmishes. And the way the situation is today, with all the dictatorships that we have, with the North Korea, the China, the Russia, the Iran, and others, and the problems going on in Syria, people losing their lives, suicide bombers, killing people. We're in a very bad situation, and the remedy for that may not even exist to be able to solve it. Very difficult, very difficult. Back when Woodrow Wilson was there, they had a chance to get rid of dictators if they could try to have everybody have a democratic society. But today, the way things are, it's impossible. I don't think it's possible anymore.
Have you ever been back to Normandy?
No, I haven't.
What would you say you are most proud of from your time in the service to our country?
I'm proud of all of them, regardless of what they did. And they put their lives in harm's way. They had no control over where they were going to go. Some had the misfortune to be in situations where it was really tough. For example, Lorna's father on the Battle of the Bulge, and all of those that were in the Air Force, and those that had to be in the tanks, and the infantry people, and hand-to-hand shooting. That's unimaginable. And what was in their mind? They all want to live. Nobody wants to die, but they were there, and that was so sad. I thought of that a lot.
Carl Felton served in the U.S.Navy. He's a veteran of World War II and was on the HMS Ceres off the coast of Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. I'm Greg Corombos. This is Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Corombos, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features, and of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.